candidates. Oh, sorry. And thank you to the attendees. For our introductions, I'm going to start with introducing Dr. Vanessa Marrero. She's the president of Parents for Public Schools of San Francisco, PPS-SF, and she is championing the enduring value of public education. She is a visionary when it comes to education and a public service leader with over 20 years. Oh, that's my son. Apologies.
My name is Jaden.
Of advancing equitable pro-social environments for K through 14 student success, and especially parents. One second, baby. She's been appointed by U.S. Secretary Miguel Cardona to the RAC West. She's stewarded the federal report identifying and addressing priority education needs, which has really helped in elevating parent voices on a national policy. And that's really important to me because I am a parent, as you can tell. So she's also been recognized by the California legislature and community groups. She brings deep SFUSD experience as a community schools coordinator, wellness director, and school social worker to help close the equity gaps across districts. That is our Dr. Vanessa Marrero, president of PPS-SF.
Thank you. Yes, and I am a parent too, except mine are older, much older. I'm really thrilled today to partner with the League of Women's Voters of San Francisco, an organization that I've been really fond of for many years. And I'm pleased to introduce, and it's my honor to introduce Michelle Moritz, who is a vice president of voter services of the League of Women Voters here in San Francisco. Michelle recently retired after 35 years as a research scientist at the University of California in San Francisco. She is a mother of two sons who also attended the San Francisco Unified School District Public Schools, and she's volunteered with the League of Women's Voters of San Francisco for 10 years. So let's give a warm applause for Michelle, who's going to take it from here.
Thank you, Vanessa. It's a pleasure to partner with Parents for Public Schools for this important event. And thank you to all the candidates for joining us tonight. So the focus of this evening's California Superintendent of Public Instruction Candidate Forum is to better understand the candidates' priorities around how to ensure equity for all students. As communities face school closures, challenges in special education, disproportionate layoffs of paraprofessionals, and ongoing curriculum debates, including ethnic studies, this conversation matters more than ever. It's important to us that everyone understand tonight's sequence. We will share the rules of engagement, followed by opening statements from the candidates, questions, community questions, and then closing statements. I'll now turn it back to Vanessa.
Great. Thank you so much for that introduction. So today I wanted to begin really quick with our statement of nonpartisanship. One of the things that we have in common with the League of Women's Voters of San Francisco. Parents for Public Schools is a nonpartisan community-based organization, and we encourage informed and active participation in government, making sure that we're fighting to make democracy work through education and advocacy. We support all public schools, but we never support or oppose candidates or political parties. And then the League of Women's Voters is also a nonpartisan political nonprofit that defends democracy, and they provide education to people to vote in elections and participate in government. They also engage in advocacy to influence public policy that benefits the community. And at one of the longest running and most respected voter information programs in the United States, we bring, or they bring a great deal of experience and expertise in handling large candidates events. So that is our statement of nonpartisanship. So to the candidates, thank you so much for being here. I want to just share our candidate rules for today. in forums in which Parents of Public Schools in San Francisco is the lead sponsor, we do reserve the right to have a final say on ground rules. The ground rules are summarized as follows. A format has been chosen, which will give each of the candidates a chance to speak within time limits and which will be fair to all candidates. Each candidate will have a chance to answer questions, and there will be no rebuttals permitted. Candidates and the community are expected to maintain polite and civil discourse. No candidate literature or paraphernalia will be displayed in the background or disseminated online or on the candidate's person during the forum. I wanted to share that we did invite Anya Long, who did not respond to our invitation for this candidate forum. Sanja Saul responded indicating that she had a previously scheduled commitment. And Wendy Casañeda Leal responded, but not in time to meet the deadline to participate. Okay? So, candidates, please get ready. We're going to begin the opening statements now. Each candidate will have 1 minute to begin their opening statements. The question is, and I'm going to start the timer, you guys, after I read the question. So the question is, what draws you to want to serve as California Superintendent of Public Instruction? And I'd like to start with Al Morisuchi. Please begin, Al.
All right. Well, thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. I'm Al Murasucci, and I'm running to be your next state superintendent because I'm passionate about public education. I have a track record of fighting for public education and getting things done over 20 years as a classroom educator, as a former local school board president, California legislator, chair of the Assembly Education Committee, and as a public school parent. I've written laws like getting ICE out of California schools, fighting book banning. I was the lead author of Proposition 2, the statewide school bond measure. And last year, I authored the bill to promote evidence-based literacy instruction to make sure that every child can read at grade level by third grade. And so I bring my passion, my track record as a candidate for state superintendent. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Al. The next, we're going to hear from Anthony.
Hi, good to see everybody. I'm afraid of the gong music, so I'll go quickly. It's good to see everybody. Thanks for taking the time. I'm drawn to this race for a number of reasons. First of all, my background, someone who started community college at the age of 20 after going through public schools my entire adolescence, K through 12. Then I went through California's entire public higher education system, our community college system, our Cal State system, got my PhD in our UC system, and then worked in early childhood education for 20 years. So for me, public education, what we see is sort of upward mobility and the ability for upward mobility, and honestly, what's left of it in our state and in our country is through public education. There seem to be very few avenues left in that regard. So for me, this is a continuation of all the work I did in early childhood education. It's part of trying to provide people the opportunities that I had. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And followed by Frank.
Buenas tardes. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for offering the time. My name is Frank Lara. I'm running for State Superintendent of Public Instruction because I've been a teacher for 10 years, fourth and fifth grade, bilingual education. I know what it feels like to be in overcrowded classrooms. I know what it feels like to have the pressures of constant curriculum changes, of constant change in leadership, and the demanding of accountability when the state of California, being the fourth largest economy, isn't held accountable to actually fully fund our schools. I have since then 5 years led the United Educators of San Francisco, who recently had first strike in 50 years. It was one of the largest unions that went out on strike recently, exposing once again that the instability and lack of sustainability in funding. And it is until we actually have strong advocates that unabashedly demand fully fund schools that we can really transform education.
Thank you, Frank. And our next is Gus.
Thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate everyone taking time to get educated on this race. It's a very important one. My name is Gus Monomal, and I'm running because I grew up in inner city St. Louis, and I was the only kid on my block to graduate high school at all, let alone go to college. My neighborhood public high school had a 25% graduation rate for 25 years in a row, with a student body that was 70% Black, 10% Latino, and 5% Asian. So I know what it does to a community when the kids in that community are not getting the education that they need. My parents made enormous sacrifices to send me to a private high school. They rented out half our house to another family to make that happen. And so education for me was a hand up, a pathway to a much better life. I've been a full-time educator for the last 23 years, executive of a multi-million-dollar education business that I built for the last 19 years, and an elected representative of 12,000 people down on the coast side for the last 4 years. So I bring the experience that we need to change how education is happening in our urban districts in particular, and I'm excited to talk about that tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next candidate is Josh.
So good evening, everybody. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in tonight's forum. I'm Josh Newman. I am a former member of the California State Senate. I'm an Army veteran. I'm a graduate of Yale University and someone who built a successful career before answering the call to public service. In the state Senate, I authored more than 40 bills across a diverse set of issues, and I had the privilege of serving as chair of the Senate Education Committee, where I presided over more than 500 bills, including my own education legislation, which deliberately centered students, families, and educators. And so, as Frank mentioned, California boasts the fourth largest economy in the world. It stands that we should also have the best public education system in the country. Sadly, we do not. Depending on the metric, we currently rank between 30th and 37th, with more than half of California public school students not meeting reading standards. Roughly a third are meeting standards in math, and equally concerning, the gaps between well-resourced and under-resourced communities continues to grow. So I'm running for state superintendent of public schools because California can and must do better. Looking forward to tonight's conversation.
Thank you for that. And next is Nichelle.
Thank you for the opportunity to join you. Good evening. My name is Nichelle Henderson. I am currently an elected member to the Los Angeles Community College District Board of Trustees, elected in 2020. I think most important to this conversation this evening is that I am an educator with 30 years experience in California public school classrooms. I started my career as a teacher's aide, worked as a sixth grade math and science teacher, and for the past 13 years, I have worked as a faculty advisor, instructor, clinical field supervisor in a teacher preparation program housed out of Fresno State. And I am running to be the next state superintendent of public instruction because California needs a plan of action to close achievement gaps, to ensure that students are literate across the curriculum. Literacy is not just reading and writing, it is everything. And as a teacher, I have a background that helps me to best understand how to help our students. Thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Richard.
All right, thank you, Vanessa, and thanks for having this forum. I'm Richard Barrera. I come at this from two places. I serve as senior policy advisor at the California Department of Education, where I support districts in protecting our immigrant students and families, and promoting student wellness and reducing chronic absenteeism, and in accelerating the development of affordable housing for educators and families by school districts. I'm also the president of the San Diego Unified School Board. I'm in my 18th year on the board. We're the second largest district in California. And today, among all large urban districts in the nation, on the nation's report card, we rank #1 in literacy and math. We have tripled our college and career readiness rates in my time on the board. And I know that when we invest in our educators, set high expectations, and support our students are capable of learning. And I believe the work that we've done in San Diego can extend across California.
Okay, great. Thank you. So our next segment is going to be a focus on governance and the role of the superintendent for public instruction. Okay, and I'm going to move it over to Michelle, who's going to facilitate this segment. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your opening statements, candidates. So regarding the restructuring proposal, Governor Newsom has proposed shifting Department of Education oversight from the elected SPI position to a new, quote, education commissioner under the governor's authority to, quote, simplify governance. Each of the candidates will have 1 minute to answer the following questions. And one question, and that is, what is your stance on the proposal to diminish the SPI's authority, and how would you ensure that the office remains a strong, independent voice for students if it moves to an advisory or evaluative role? Share 3 strategies that will lead and transform education regardless of the internal politics. We'll start with Anthony Rendon.
Sorry, little childcare issue here. I hate the governor's proposal. I think it's awful. I think it's ill-timed. I think at a time when democracies are falling all over, being threatened all over Europe, all over Latin America, and in the United States, to increase the power of the executive branch and decrease independent branches, and in essence, decrease the power of the legislative branch is an awful idea. I served with Jerry Brown, did not agree with virtually anything that he thought about public education. There are several gubernatorial candidates, including a couple of Democrats whose ideas I don't agree on public education. I think voters have decided they want to have control over an independently elected person in that role, and I think they should continue to do so. In terms of strategies, I think it's important, A, to push back against the governor's proposal.
Thank you, Anthony Rendon. Next, we'll hear from Frank Lara.
Thank you for the question, and I also agree it's a power grab by the current governor. We should be wary that at a national level, there's a move towards concentrating power at the top and eliminating the right to vote. We should not be allowing that in California. My experience here in San Francisco really offers, I think, an opportunity to expand the tactics, the organizing that we've done in San Francisco statewide. Oftentimes, the intervention by the CDE is done in a manner that punishes districts instead of celebrates districts. We have been threatened with state takeover, and that has led to massive instability in San Francisco instead of providing an actual vision and points of unity to expand the quality of education. So using that experience, how do then we organize across the state and across districts to understand their individual circumstances, but at the same time, advocate for more funding. We cannot demand that school sites working off crumbs actually meet the needs of our students.
Thank you, Frank. Next will be Gus Matamal.
Thank you. Like my fellow candidates here, I don't support this proposal. I think it's a bad idea. But let's assume for a second that it happens. As superintendent, there are still 2 important things that I can do. One is to be a facilitator of change. So to go to our districts and ask, what are you doing that's different or entrepreneurial? What would you like to be doing that's different or entrepreneurial? And let me know what is it that's getting in the way. Let me use the power that remains in this office and the visibility of it, which will still remain, to help remove barriers to the entrepreneurial or innovative activity that you want to be doing. And then the second thing is to be an advocate for change. So as we see what works on the ground, we always talk about the states as laboratories of democracy. I think the districts are laboratories of education. As we see what's going on the ground and we see some things that are working, let's take those and let's put upward pressure. So I, as superintendent, could put upward pressure on the legislature and the state board to actually scale those working ideas to the rest of our districts across the state. And that's how we will move our ship forward, even if the governor takes over the management of the bureaucracy itself. Thank you.
Thank you, Gus. Next will be Josh Newman.
So thanks. I agree with my colleagues. I think this is not only misguided, but it's likely to work out badly. And so on paper, this promises some level of better alignment, but I think in practice, what it's not going to do, and some of my colleagues have touched on it, it's not likely to increase CDE's accountability, creativity, or collaboration. And that has been what has been so sorely missing from the relationship between the state and the nearly 1,000 school districts. And so I'm running for this position, and we all started prior to the governor's proposal coming forward, because I believe, as some have mentioned, that the Department of Education needs to be reoriented and re-energized to be a full partner and a collaborative asset and not an adversary for districts. There is one promising element of this proposal, and that's to add the SPI to the boards of the community college and the CSU. I think we should do that anyway. That is promising.
Thank you. Next is Nichelle Henderson.
Thank you for that question. In my view, the proposal is terrible. It is the equivalent of cutting your nose off to spite your face. The superintendent of public instruction is a constitutional officer with duties and authority. Although the authority is very limited, the power of the role is immense. And with local control, the superintendent has limited authority over what they can force schools to do, but the oversight of the Department of Education is what is most important, because the Department of Education is where the work happens in terms of educational change, policy, where the people are that are doing this work. And so the strategies for me would just be continue to be the top ombudsman for an advocate for education, working with schools to make sure that they are aligned and in compliance through a lens of support.
Thank you, Nichelle. Next is Richard Barrera.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. I agree with all of my colleagues here. Voters right now are getting their ballots, and when they look at the choice for state superintendent, it says very clearly on the ballot that the state superintendent oversees the California Department of Education. So it's a bait and switch when voters are electing somebody to oversee the Department of Education and improve our schools, to take that authority away from the state superintendent. I think what this proposal is trying to address is that in Sacramento, unlike in local districts, nobody is setting clear goals. Nobody is holding themselves accountable to make sure that their actions are in alignment with those goals. And nobody is developing a budget that aligns with how to produce clear outcomes for students. I will lead a coalition of educators, parents, community leaders to set clear goals, set clear budgets, and hold people accountable to those goals.
Thank you, Richard. Next is Al Moratsuchi.
Well, it sounds like we're all in agreement. I'm opposed. We're looking at a situation where we might have, two Republican candidates moving on to be our next governor. We have a system of checks and balances for a reason, and that's why we need to continue to keep the power, with the state superintendent as the chief education officer. Also, I mean, it's replacing a bureaucrat with a department that reports to an independently elected officer. It's just going to be like any other bureaucracy. I suspect if the DMV were headed by an independently elected officer, it would be more responsive to constituents. And so, for all those reasons, I'm opposed to the proposal. If it goes through, I'm going to continue to champion public education. It's still going to be the independently elected constitutional officer from preschool all the way through public higher education. And so there's going to continue to be tremendous opportunities to shape the future of public education at all levels.
Thank you. Now I'll turn it over to Vanessa, who will ask the next series of questions.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates. This segment is a focus on funding and enrollment. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to answer the question. While all questions in the segment are related, I want to make sure you know that specific questions will be asked of each of you candidates. Okay? We're going to begin with Frank Lada, and I'll read the question, Frank, and then I will begin the timer. And that will happen for each candidate. All right? So this is a focus on shifting enrollment-based funding. Here's the question. California is one of 6 states that still fund schools based on average daily attendance, ADA, which penalizes districts for absences even when they must staff for every enrolled student. Will you commit to working with the state legislature to transition to an enrollment-based funding model? And what specific legislative steps will you take to ensure this change is fiscally sustainable under Proposition 98? Your time will begin now.
Thank you for the question. And yes, I would support and organize also to make sure that we move towards that enrollment-based model. I think when it comes to funding, treating funding where we're at, which is maybe less than 3% of the gross state product compared to like Vermont, who's at 6%, as was mentioned in this talk, we're always at the lower 30 statewide in terms of the numbers of state per pupil funding, even though that has changed thanks largely to the pressures of unions, of striking educators, of parents fighting back. That has from 2019, when we were below 20,000 per student, and now thanks to all the actions, thanks to all the advocacy, we're at $28,000 per student, and yet we're still in the bottom half. So in order to really talk about fiscal stability and the actual future of transforming education, we need to radically fund education, and the money is there. I think Prop 98, a perfect example that's going on right now, is that the governor, despite having the floor be Prop 98, the amount of dollars, he was actually withholding $5.6 billion that should have gone to the schools automatically. So this is the type of politics that are going on with our public schools that should be unacceptable, is that schools are being asked for accountability, yet are not being given the supports. And in the long term, what we need to talk about with increasing the funding is that we actually need to lower classroom sizes. Many of these numbers were implemented in the 1970s and part of Ed Code, where we need to really, if we want to transform education, have 18 students in the lower grades, 25 students in the middle and upper grades. And with that, we're actually being short-sighted about potentially closing schools, potentially pulling back on district property, because we would actually need more classrooms. We'd actually need more staff. And that's what will bring about true educational transformation in the state, which is something we deserve.
Thank you. So followed by Gus, legislative advocacy strategy. Here's a question. As an independent elected official, how will you use your office to sponsor and champion legislation that replaces the current ADA seat count with a more stable membership count? And how will you persuade the governor and the legislature to prioritize this multi-billion-dollar shift in the state budget? Your time will start now.
Thank you for that question. So first of all, just to touch really quickly on ADA versus enrollment, I want to remind everyone that one of the biggest drivers of the financial difficulties we face in the public school system is that enrollment in California is dropping. So if enrollment is dropping, I don't think it's such a great idea to lash the system to the mast of a sinking ship. So instead, the way that we can fix that, I've proposed already that the way we should do it is as the education budget grows, because it naturally grows as the overall state budget grows. As it grows, we should repurpose all the future growth in that budget for the next several years. Anything past the rate of inflation, we're going to repurpose to hiring more teachers and lowering the class sizes. Because if we want to do anything about the kind of unequal outcomes that we're seeing in our school system, which, by the way, you've heard about San Diego. If you're a Black student in San Diego, according to what's in ed data, only about 1 in 3 of those students meet reading standards, and only 1 in 5 meet math standards. If that's the number one performance among urban districts, that tells us something alarming about how education is actually working out in our urban districts. The way to actually solve a problem like that is to lower class sizes so that the students are getting more time with an instructor. Now, how would I do that? That's obviously a legislative fix. I'm happy to work in partnership with our state legislatures, with the governor, to get that kind of proposal passed. And I think there's there's a real incentive for them to do it because it's 6 million kids. This is a state that talks a big game about equity, and yet we see the results that we're seeing in our districts year in and year out. So I think there's an opportunity here to say, instead of doing equity in rhetoric, let's do equity in results. And the simple way to do that is get our class sizes down. That's a good starting first point. And then we can look at other opportunities to elevate our public schools. But if we repurpose that money to lowering class sizes, which is something the legislature can do today, they have a supermajority, they have the ability to do it. I will work with them to make it happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Josh. This is a focus on attracting and retaining students. And here's a question. With nearly 300,000 students having left California public schools recently, how will you work with lawmakers to create incentives for families to return, such as expanding dual enrollment opportunities with community colleges or improving school safety and specialized programming? Your time will start now.
Okay, so it is a good question. So people vote with their feet, and families. I'm always impressed at how much sort of trouble they'll go through to find the right opportunity for their kids. As a member of the state senate, I did a couple of bills I think they're squarely in this area. One was the expansion and extension of the District of Choice program, which is a program that lets a district declare itself a district of choice and makes it much easier for parents, families from neighboring districts to place their kids in those districts. Proud of the work that I did. All the evidence shows that not only are kids better served by programs that fit their needs, but it creates competitive pressure among neighboring districts to raise the level of their offerings. On dual enrollment, equally proud. I did a bill in 2024, SB 1244, that solved a really thorny problem where community colleges were not being responsive or respectful to districts. And so what SB 1244 does is it allows for school districts to have additional options to create partnerships that suit their CTE and other college level instruction needs. That is so important, especially for first generation college students or for students for whom college has not been a family tradition. To be able to be in that environment and to take college level instruction is a transformative experience. And so what we should do at the state level is identify best practices and ensure that districts are aware of them and provided the resources to then replicate those practices so they can raise the level of their offerings as well. And if we can do that, then I think that takes a lot of the energy out of the charter versus publics argument. But more importantly, it creates a standard of improvement and rigor that every family will benefit from.
Thank you. This is the next question is for Nichelle. This is a focus on universal programs. Current priorities include expanding transitional kindergarten, formerly known as TK, and universal school meals. Here's the question. How will you ensure the quality and sustainability of the universal TK rollout, especially regarding facilities and specialized teacher staffing? Your time will start now.
Thank you for that question. I'm working in a teacher preparation program right now because transitional kindergarten teachers are able to be credentialed, wherein preschool teachers are not. TK is a transition, so we're still dealing with small children that we are placing on a regular big kid campus. So TK teachers should still be well-versed in child development. They should understand how little people learn and their needs in terms of learning through play and exploration, same as they would in preschool. So that expectation of that understanding should not change. As superintendent, my work would be around continuing funding around universal preschool also because of that 0 through 3 dynamic around child development, but ensuring that transition between preschool and kindergarten gets children ready for the regular school day that is kindergarten, by making sure that they are prepared to become literate, prepared to be mathematical geniuses and study all of the academic curricula that they'll be learning. And we need specialized teachers that understand child development, but are also understand the content areas that they will need to be teaching so that students can learn. And the superintendent should be overseeing what that looks like in terms of their preparation, in terms of professional development, and understanding what students' learning looks like in these programs.
Thank you. This is a question for Richard, a focus on equitable resource allocation. Here's a question. Low-income students are statistically more likely to miss school, leading to less funding for the very districts that need it most. How will your legislative agenda ensure that a shift to enrollment-based funding specifically targets resources to the high-need districts rather than just creating a windfall for more affluent areas? Your time will start now.
No, thank you for that question, Vanessa. And I think that's really more than anything hitting the major point of why it's wrong for California to be one of the really 5 states in the country that persists with enrollment-based funding. So the legislative analyst report that just came out shows that the ADA-based funding system that California has actually costs school districts about $6 billion a year. And disproportionately, that costs the highest poverty districts the most. And it's premised on the idea that somehow the ADA-based system creates an incentive for districts to improve attendance, but that's never been true. And none of the other states that have an ADA-based system have shown that that actually improves attendance. Meanwhile, we have districts like Compton Unified with 90+% socioeconomically disadvantaged that took its chronic absenteeism rate down from 17% to now below 7%. So where we can begin with the shift to enrollment-based funding is districts like Compton. We can look at districts that receive concentration funds, and any district that right now is back at the state's pre-pandemic average of 12.5% chronic absenteeism should immediately be transitioned into enrollment-based funding so that those districts can continue to invest in the strategies that actually make a student wake up in the morning and want to be at school. The after-school programs, the arts and music, the career pathways at the high school level, those are the kinds of programs that actually improve attendance. And rather than have a punitive system that was developed in the late 90s, let's shift to an incentive-based system that actually rewards districts that are improving attendance, like Compton Unified.
Thank you for that. The next candidate is Al. The category is small school protection. And here's a question. Small schools often serve the most vulnerable or rural populations, but are the first one on the chopping block during budget cuts. How will you adjust the state's funding formula to provide a stability cushion for schools with low enrollment and to ensure they remain viable? Your time will start now.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm not sure if it's accurate that they're the first to be cut because, as we've been talking about, we have an attendance-based funding system, and so it's proportional to the number of students that they have. I think the challenge with the small school districts is that a lot of times they don't have that capacity. A lot of if the bus driver is sick, then the superintendent has to jump in and drive the bus. And I've visited those small school districts, especially in the North State area of California, other rural parts of the state of California. Um, and so, we need to make sure that we provide basic funding for all school districts. As the lead author of Proposition 2, for example, I made sure that we created a set aside in funding for small school districts so that even if they don't have the local property tax base to support local school bond measures, that we made sure that we set up financial hardship provisions to set aside funding for small school districts. And that's what, I want to make sure that we do that not only for the school facilities programs, but also for the overall general fund operations.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. Okay, and here's the next candidate, Anthony. This is a focus on opportunity gaps. Persistent opportunity gaps remain for Black and Native American students. What specific data-driven intervention will you champion to close these gaps that have exacerbated recent learning loss? Your time will start now.
I think what we've seen that definitely works is the community school model, and the community school model and all the ancillary services beyond the curricular benefits provided by good schools. The ancillary benefits are really what benefit a lot of our communities that are challenged with socioeconomic problems. We saw particularly during COVID that there were certain service delivery models, particularly those that utilized a lot of the services of nearby nonprofits and government entities that could help alleviate a lot of those problems, a lot of the socioeconomic problems and some of the mental health problems. For me, that was the big sort of discovery of COVID that we then developed, morphed into our community schools project. We need to expand those. From the perspective of cost, I think we see that in the long run, we end up gaining more because a lack of services provided elsewhere by other nonprofits and other government entities.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. So here's the next category, everybody. This is going to be a totally different category. This is a focus on school closures. So each of you are going to have 1 minute to answer this question. It's going to be the same question for each candidate, okay? I'm going to ask a question, and then I'm going to call on the first candidate. That candidate will answer, and then I'll call on the next, and so forth, okay? So the no closure strategy. Across California, districts are considering school closures to address budget deficits and declining enrollment. If elected, what specific state-level policies or funding mechanisms will you implement to help districts keep neighborhood schools open and avoid the displacement of students? We'll start with Gus, and we're at 1 minute per candidate.
Thanks for that. That's a very important question. A lot of communities are really struggling with that, the very painful discussions about how to navigate issues like school closures. So one thing that I would do is before any discussion of closing a school, I would want to know in that district, how is the money that district has, how has it been spent? I would want to see a full public audit of the spending of that district before we look at closing any schools, because I want to know, like, is the money being spent well? So if you look at performances of school districts, you can find plenty of opportunities to cut some spending in ways that won't impact services. Let's make sure that we do that first so that we close as much of the gap as possible. So there's as little need to do something as painful to a community as closing a school. As enrollment drops, that's something that we're going to have to wrestle with. And I want to make sure that we are not going to school closures before we address other things like making sure our spending is actually being done efficiently. If we do that, then we will be able to minimize the pain and get through this as a community together. Thank you.
Thank you. Followed by Josh.
So thank you for the question. So Anthony touched on something very important here, as it relates to the community schools model. Schools are more than simply places for kids to learn. They are really important loci within a community for, sort of the center of a community. And we should do everything possible to keep schools open. And that's why I think the shift from ADA-based funding to enrollment-based funding is so important. It'll provide additional flexibility there. But we also need CDE to be more proactive and to provide better oversight and better tools so that schools and districts do not get into the kinds of fiscal straits that lead them to make those kinds of decisions. The closing of a school has a really adverse effect on a community, and it's largely avoidable. And so, I would do everything I could, including working with the legislature to provide additional funds and ensuring that CDE had the capacity and the dedicated teams to intervene and support school districts well before they got to the point where they were about to lose a school.
Thank you. Nichelle, you're next.
I believe that the question that needs to be asked is, Why are we considering the school closure? Is it because we don't have children in the community that are attending the school? Is it because of an overexpansion of charter schools? Is it because the school is losing its funding because students are not attending as regularly as they could or should? Finding out the why and addressing the why is the concern, because if the reason for closure is an overexpansion of charter schools, then that can be addressed and should be addressed. If it's an attendance issue, which impacts funding, then a plan of action should be put into place to not just incentivize parents and students to get students into classrooms, but have opportunities and ways for students to attend school and participate in their learning outside of the traditional ways, such as hybrid options and virtual options.
Thank you. Richard, you're next.
Yeah, thanks for that question. So, first of all, closing schools as a budget strategy is usually a bad idea because if you close a school and the kids leave and go to another school, you might be saving a little bit of money on, the cost of a principal and some administrative costs. But if the students actually leave the school district and go to a charter school or go to a different district, and you're losing all of that ADA, you're actually losing money in a school closure strategy. So I don't think I don't think school closures should start as this is somehow the way to fix districts' budget problems. I agree with what many of my colleagues said. I represent high poverty schools in San Diego that are seeing increases in enrollment. And it's because we've invested in the community schools model, because we've invested in school facilities, programming that makes parents want to be there.
Thank you. Next candidate is Al.
Yes, schools are community hubs, especially our community schools. We're trying to get more family community engagement in schools as hubs in our community. And so, I agree that uh, closing schools should be our absolute last resort. But at the same time, as the only candidate in this race that has both a statewide education leadership experience as well as local school district governance experience, those decisions need to be made by the local school boards so that, one size doesn't fit all. We have 1,000 districts, a lot of different circumstances in different school districts. And that's where we need to have our local school districts decide how and how to balance their budgets, including these discussions about what investments to make to keep schools open.
Great, thank you. Followed by Anthony.
I think a lot of what Richard and Gus talked about, I think was where I would like to start. Like Gus said, I think there needs to be a tremendous amount of transparency and data. We've seen as recently as the LA Unified, the potential walkout, the strike threat that almost happened. There's a tremendous mathematical disagreement between where the school board said the district was and where the union said the district was. There was about a $6 billion discrepancy between the two. With transparency that can be provided by the state auditor, by the state controller, we can find out the real financial state of some of these districts from a neutral perspective. As Richard said, I do think school closures is an attractive sort of a short-term solution for a lot of school districts, but in the long term, it doesn't make sense. If you are going to close schools, if that's the route that districts choose to take, I think there needs to be tremendous community involvement, making sure that parents and local teachers and community has a say in which schools get closed. Thank you.
Thank you. And next candidate, Frank.
Thank you so much for the question. I think closing schools is a very short-sighted view towards addressing or like even providing any vision for the future of our public schools. The truth is, if it's fully funded, as we pointed out multiple times, the fourth largest economy in the world has not been granted the per pupil funding that our students deserve. If we were to reimagine that, that would mean that we can have lower classroom sizes and actually expand the need for space. So the closure is actually preventing us from from eventually offering our children smaller classroom sizes. I think on another level, which we're very much experiencing here in San Francisco, it's this vulture attitude towards real estate and the privatization of public land. I think as state superintendent of public instruction, what I made clear to the legislature and also work with the governor is that if school districts are talking about that and there's a concern for cost, can we pause or can we subsidize properties in order to keep them public and have a long-term plan for public workforce housing, family housing?
Okay, great. Thank you. So we're now going to turn it over to Michelle for the local control funding formula and the local control plan questions. Each question will have a time limit of 1 minute. Michelle?
Yes, thank you. We'll start with Josh Newman. And your question, well, first, kind of a preamble. Tensions exist over federal funding risks related to transgender student participation in sports and immigration enforcement on campuses. The question is, how do you plan to protect California's education funding and student privacy rights in the face of potential federal policy shifts or funding cuts?
So, this has been, a very fraught issue for a number of years, but California's commitment is really explicit to the protection of the rights and privacy of every student. And that has withstood federal attacks and has stood up in court. And I think as superintendent, I would continue to assert our right as a state to practice our values. And the Attorney General has actually been a very good partner in this regard. And so as superintendent, it seems unavoidable given sort of the conduct and attitude of the Trump administration. We're going to find ourselves in that position more than once in the future. But it is more than worth the fight. Every student in California, irrespective of their gender identity, their gender presentation, everything they are, or their immigration status for that matter, is absolutely deserving of the assurance of privacy, dignity, and protection in school. And that has to be a North Star for any superintendent.
Thank you. The next question is for Nichelle, and it's about adjusting the LCFF equity gap. If the state shifts from average daily attendance, or ADA, to enrollment-based funding, the local control funding formula will require a massive recalibration. How will you work with the legislature to adjust the supplemental and concentration grants so that high-need districts don't lose their equity advantage during the transition?
Well, the idea with moving away from an attendance-based model to an enrollment-based model shouldn't cause loss. The idea is we should be looking through the lens of equity. So smaller schools districts and districts where the income level of residents is lower, we have more multifamily dwellings versus homes, and you're not getting that tax revenue, and we're not looking at increasing the base of Prop 98. We have to think in terms of how we bring the districts that are hurting for dollars up to a level where there's some equity, and where no school loses their funding, but they gain on the side of having funding come in based off of their capacity, not what they actually have in classrooms.
The next question is for Richard. This is about defining local control versus state mandates. And the question is, districts often argue that local control is undermined by unfunded state mandates. How will you ensure that new legislative requirements for literacy or mental health come with dedicated funding rather than forcing districts to dip into their base local control funding formula grants?
Yeah, well, we need to, and I really appreciate that question. We need to start with the understanding that the money that comes into Prop 98, and many of us have commented that Prop 98 is not supposed to be a ceiling, it's supposed to be a floor. But the money that comes into Prop 98 is the money that the state then distributes out to school districts. And when the state decides to tie that money up rather than, increasing the base grant of LCFF, that is the source of these unfunded mandates. It's also the source of, districts spending an enormous amount of time in compliance, with these categorical grants that come down. So we need to begin by increasing the base funding. And through that, then we need to be evaluating outcomes, for districts rather than continuing to tie the hands of districts with more categorical funding.
Thank you. Next is for Al about fiscal accountability. The Local Control and Accountability Plan, or LCAP, is meant to show how LCFF funds improve services for high-need students, yet many find the reports impenetrable. What specific reforms will you propose to the legislature to make LCAPs more transparent and easier for parents to use as a tool to prevent school closures?
Yes, so I actually I have legislation that's pending in the legislature now to try to simplify the LCAP reporting requirements so that we make it more user friendly for parents and families. Um, the LCAP is supposed to be a measure of transparency and accountability for families to know how school districts are spending dollars, but it's become so unwieldy that most families, they don't bother to read these telephone book thick LCAP plans, and so I'm working on a plan to alleviate a lot of those reporting, to streamline and simplify the reporting requirements to make it more user friendly.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Anthony Rendon. This is about regarding protecting local reserves. To attract families back to public schools, some propose using local control funding formula to fund niche programs like dual language immersion or career technical education, CTE, at every site. Would you support a legislative shift to earmark LCFF funds specifically for these attractor programs to help districts compete with private and charter options?
Well, earlier you talked about the need for local control, or the fight, I should say, the challenge between local control and state control. And I think this is a perfect example of where local control is important. I think this is a perfect example of local school district officials knowing their districts best, knowing what's needed in their district. Obviously, the job market is much different in an urban area than it is in a rural area. It's much different in a rural area in Coachella Valley than it is in a place like Humboldt. So I think this is a specific area where there should be tremendous autonomy. Obviously, oversight and accountability from at the state level for how funds are being spent. But this is a good place for there to be local autonomy over how dollars are spent.
Thank you. Next is for Frank Lara regarding family partnership. Please share your stance on family engagement and what is your commitment to see it consistently threaded through our educational system?
Thank you for this. And even in San Francisco, I'm very well known in terms of my family partnership. It's the reason why our school is the only school that continues to host temporary housing for our families in their physical education gym. And that's because of the family and educator partnership. Myself, I received an award for raising over $100,000 for undocumented families through the Undocu Fund when we were receiving paychecks by the then administration during COVID. Again, showing our families that we're there committed to stand side by side with them. We cannot do anything as educators, and it's always been the fact that educators continue to support, families continue to support educators. We saw that during the strike. We see it in the surveys that they are actually wanting to see educators at the forefront of fighting for education. So without them, it's not possible. But more importantly, we need to empower them. And as State Superintendent of Public Instruction, I will make this accessible and show them the opportunities and where to fight and stand with educators.
Thank you. Next is for Gus regarding multilingual learners. How will you support English learners, especially those from less common language backgrounds, if elected?
So I love that question. So I think it's really, we do in California have obviously a very wide range of different cultures and ethnicities. And there are going to be a lot of different languages that are spoken. I think part of it is actually, believe it or not, more of a focus on making sure they're actually getting the English instruction that they need, because that's what they're going to need to go on and be successful elsewhere in the system as they move up in age. I do think there needs to be some support because a lot of the kids are going to come to school not able to, not as fluent in English as they're going to be in their other languages. And we will have to look at, for some languages where there's going to be enough kind of tonnage to be able to have dedicated resources for that. Others, we may have to look at more tech-driven options to allow people to work remotely, because some of the languages are a little more niche. But I will make sure that I will do everything that I can as superintendent to make sure that we are addressing either dedicated resources that are local or using technology to help, and but also making sure they get the English instruction they need so they can be successful. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to turn to systemic barriers as a topic. And now each candidate will get the same question and have 1 minute to answer. We'll start with Nichelle. And the question is, if you could remove one barrier in California's education system tomorrow, what would it be? And what is stopping us from doing it now? Nichelle?
The barrier that I see is standardized testing, the high stakes nature of standardized testing. We don't use the assessment data for anything because if we did, we wouldn't have a system of social promotion. That barrier is an equity issue. So we have students that are matriculating from grade to grade, not demonstrating mastery of the state standards or the Common Core standards, but we place such a high stakes nature on the outcome of the test where we are punitively blaming teachers and blaming our school districts when the testing itself is contrary to what we say our priorities are in terms of student learning and student outcomes. And so the idea is to reform the way that we assess our students, the way that we utilize that data, and the way that we allow teachers to teach in our classrooms, teaching for understanding long-term learning versus to a test.
Thank you. Next is Richard.
Well, I really appreciate Michelle's answer to that, and I do think we've gotten trapped in this system of standardized testing, and I think it comes from a punitive place, and so opening up our definition of the outcomes that we're trying to achieve for our students. For instance, the indicator on the dashboard of college and career readiness is so much more important an indicator than once a year standardized testing, because that's a question of, are our students, when they come through our system, are they prepared to succeed in the world, in college or career or both? So I think a lot more emphasis on outcomes and metrics that actually affect young people's lives than these standardized test scores, which is all about a kind of a style of corporate management, reduce the definition of education to something that's simply easy to manage. That's where that comes from. And it's never worked, and it doesn't actually increase test scores. But meanwhile, when we focus on engaging our young people around relevant curriculum and opportunities, that's when we see students thrive.
Thank you. Next, we'd like to hear from Al.
Yes, well, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question the way you want me to answer it, but if there's one change that I would make, in an aspirational sense, I mean, it's poverty, right? It's you know public schools exist to provide equal educational opportunity for all, regardless of who you are, regardless of where you live. And yet we know that we have the opportunity gaps, the achievement gaps, largely based on income. And so that's why, my first term in the legislature, I championed the local control funding formula to get more funding to students with the greatest needs. That's why I've been championing programs like community schools, expanded learning opportunities to get more after-school opportunity programs, championing early childhood education. We know that the biggest opportunity gap exists in those 0 to 5 years for our low-income families. And so, I'm going to continue to champion getting more program support resources to the students with the greatest needs.
Thank you. Next, we have Anthony.
I think the greatest obstacle and what I would like to see eliminated, again in an aspirational sense, is to eliminate funding disparities based on particularly based on local property taxes, and also to provide equity, to have the state provide equity through funding models that give more to school districts that have less. I think part of what should be considered in that equation is not only the local property taxes, but also what local school districts are able to contribute. If you think about my daughter's school district, I've volunteered upwards of 50 some hours this week. I have the ability to do so. I'm right around the median in terms of the volunteer hours. I know in a lot of working class districts, I know in a lot of districts where people have to commute long distances, that's not the case. So my daughter's public school district has a lot of advantages that other school districts don't have. One of the reasons that we have listed equity is because of Proposition 13 that needs to be done as well.
Thank you. Now we can hear from Frank, please.
Thank you. The one issue and aspiration would be lower classroom sizes. As simple as it sounds, constantly districts are having to battle locally around potentially reducing by 1 student, 2 students, and the cost is in the millions, sometimes tens of millions, to do that across the district. And the fact that we haven't, as the 4th largest economy in the world, again, the per pupil funding being less than 30, like at the bottom 30, the fact that we haven't as a state invested to really transform education, where you're having, again, 15 to 18 students in the lower grades, you're having no more than 25 students in the upper grades. The profession itself has consistently been, for the last 10 years, 50% of educators leaving after 7 years. I mean, whatever way you look at it, investment, money, cost of people's time to come into this profession, and the loss of professionalism due to the high levels of stress. If we actually had a chance to have low classroom sizes where an adult was meeting the needs of our students, then we can truly transform education.
Thank you. Gus, please go ahead.
Man, this is tough going right after Frank, because I also would say the number one thing that I would point to is actually class sizes. That's why in my book, where I laid out what my platform would be, one of the first things I addressed was, here's how you can actually restructure the funding formula, the concentration in the supplemental grants, to shift future growth in the budget to help lower class sizes, because that actually is I think the way that you actually change the performance of the system, which, by the way, the performance of the system, how the system is doing because of the standardized tests. They are not a goal, they are just a measurement tool. And yes, the results that they tell you are often depressing. I quoted some earlier, some of those results. But getting rid of the tests themselves is just shooting the messenger. That's not what we should do. It's lowering the class sizes because this is a human problem and it requires a human solution. That means bodies, more teachers. And as the class sizes go down, then it actually will be possible, as Frank mentioned, for teachers to feel like they're more empowered, to have a better quality of life in their job, which will help retain our teachers in the profession. We are losing a huge fraction of them in just 3 to 5 years. So lowering the classes is the way to address that. There is a way to do it without having to raise taxes by repurposing the future growth. I laid out the mechanics of that in my platform, and I will work with the legislature to try and make that happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll have Josh answer this question.
Right. So interesting answers from everybody. I guess let me build on or give a variation on Al's answer. And I think one of the biggest barriers facing California's students and families is kind of always hiding in plain sight. And that's the lack of alignment between the school day and the work day in California. And the fact that school goes from 8 to 2:30, sometimes 8 to noon on Wednesdays, creates massive stresses among working families. You have so many families. We have a single parent household or dual learner households working so hard to make ends meet in this high cost of living state. And we know the answer is out there, is to make sure that schools provide, sort of education and opportunities for enrichment throughout the whole workday. And expanded learning opportunities programs have been a great sort of demonstrator of the benefit of these programs. And so the governor should be credited for allocating more money last year to do that. Every school should provide that level of service, either directly or with partners in their neighborhoods.
Thank you. Now we'll go to our next segment, and I'll turn it over to Vanessa.
Okay, wonderful. So this segment is going to focus on one question, and the population is immigrant and refugee students. I'm going to say the order in which we'll go, but first let me mention the question. The question is simply put as, how will you support immigrant and refugee students if elected? And I'd like to start with Richard. 1 minute each.
Okay, thanks, Vanessa. So when the Trump was elected the first time in 2017, I led the effort in our school district to develop a policy that keeps ICE off of campuses. That's now the state law. And part of my job at the California Department of Education is enforcing that law to make sure that districts are actually in compliance. But it goes beyond the policy of keeping ICE off of campuses, because where we see the real terror occur is when families are taking their students to and from schools, and we see parents arrested as they're there to pick up their students or after they drop off their students. So what we need to do is connect schools and school districts with community-based networks that are organized to prevent this kind of ICE terrorism that we see from the Trump administration. And we've seen powerful examples of communities rallying to protect their students and families.
Thank you. Next is Al.
Yeah, so last year I was proud to author the California Safe Haven Schools Act, which is the state law to keep ICE out of California schools statewide. That was following my conversations with immigrant students, in my classroom at El Camino Community College, as well as schools, communities throughout the state where I've heard from students. And so that was my number one priority, to fight Trump and his immigration raids. But beyond that, I've championed programs for English learners. A couple of weeks ago, I was honored by the California Association for Bilingual Education, because I've been a big champion of the English Learner Roadmap. I've been a big champion of the multilingual programs, to support our immigrant kids, many of whom come from households speaking languages other than English. And so providing the support to get them to preserve and be proud of their own language and culture, while at the same time teaching them English.
Thank you. Anthony, next.
I would work on that the same way I worked on it when I was speaker, and the same way we worked on it when Donald Trump was president of the United States the first time. Where we were really effective in the legislature was, in particular, was taking on the Trump administration in the courts. That's something that we did upwards of, I believe, 14 times, 14 different lawsuits against the federal government. We were successful in the vast majority of those. The past year, I've been working for the UCLA Voting Rights Project. We've done the same thing. This past week, we sued the state of Florida on their illegally gerrymandered maps. So ultimately, the fight for immigrant families, the fight for refugee families, is one that California has been fighting valiantly. But the federal government, we know wants to interfere with our efforts, and the best way to push back is through the courts, and to do so honestly on a multi-state basis. We know that joining with like-minded and like-missioned states like Hawaii, like Oregon, that's the last time it was.
Thank you. Frank, you're next.
Thank you so much for the question. I've been a pretty prominent immigrant rights advocate and organizer here in San Francisco for more than a decade now. And the way that came about was actually putting our bodies in the line. UESF, the United Educators of San Francisco, made it very clear during the first Trump administration, second Trump administration, that families need to be welcomed. And that doesn't come from resolutions, propositions, or like, even the laws. It means putting yourself out there as a leader. And as the executive vice president, that's what we did. Like, we presented ourselves to our family, your safest place is here at school. And then we also won in our most recent contract something that UTLA, the United Teachers of Los Angeles, has also won, making sure that sanctuary is encoded into the contract so that districts actually have to defend or support our members as they put their bodies on the line. So as state superintendent of public instruction, I will be out in front and be a target for the Trump administration in defense of our families.
Thank you. Gus, you're next.
Thank you for the question. First of all, every student should be able to show up to school, get a good education, and then go home to their families. So it shouldn't matter socioeconomic status, race, gender, immigration status. None of those things should matter. Every kid should be able to show up to school, get a good education, go home to their families. As superintendent, I will make sure that as a system, we are always following the law, no more, no less. So if a law enforcement officer shows up to a school with a signed judicial warrant, of course, the school is under a legal obligation to cooperate with that warrant, only to the letter of whatever that warrant says. If an immigration officer or any other law enforcement officer shows up to a school without a signed warrant, the school is under absolutely no obligation to do anything other than just be polite to whoever that is. And I would encourage schools to follow the sort of legal obligation that they have, but no more and no less than that. I think if we just focus on that, we will be able to get our families through some of the things that we're going through right now as a nation. But we will get through it together. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Josh.
Thank you. I guess so. Like Al, like Anthony, I was proud to vote for SB 54 in 2017, which is still in effect, the California Values Act, which forbids California law enforcement from participating directly in federal immigration acts. So important, to Richard's point. These stories about families being separated, especially where father, mother is detained, dropping off or picking up their child from school, should not happen. And I support SB 54. I'm from Orange County. That came at real political cost, but it was the right thing to do. And I think my colleagues have mentioned some things that are important. CDE, superintendent, can be really helpful to districts in providing protocols, templates, best practice support, so that every district has not only a plan, but can build out the relationships with neighborhood assets and partners, as Richard mentioned, to best protect our students and their families. And as Anthony mentioned, the courts, unfortunately, will be a resource, and the AG and the superintendent will be working on that together.
Thank you. Nichelle, you're next.
Yes. Supporting immigrant and refugee students is, in my view, a two-pronged, twofold approach. You have to think about their access to a quality education, as well as their physical protections and protections of data and their privacy. We're thinking language acquisition support. We're thinking culturally relevant curriculum. We're thinking access to ethnic studies. We're thinking ways to combat this system where they feel welcome, they feel supported academically and socially. And then we think about protections around immigration enforcement. With LA Community College District, I chair a student protections task force where we meet monthly and talk to our stakeholders, including our students, as to their rights, what they can do, what they can't do, what they shouldn't do, and how we can keep our schools as safe havens for our students while they're there, on their way there, and when they're leaving. And that's what I intend to do as superintendent of public instruction.
Thank you. Okay, so we are coming down to time. This next category is going to be special education. It'll be one question. And then we're going to follow that by community questions, if there are any that folks would like to ask, and then followed by your closing statement. Each of the responses are going to be 1 minute besides the closing statement. We're asking that you keep that down to 30 seconds. This next category, one question, is a focus on special education. Here is the question. Full funding advocacy. The federal government has never met its promise to fund 40% of the cost of the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. As SPI, what specific coalition building strategies will you use to demand that the federal government pay its fair share and relieves the burden on California taxpayers? 1 minute each. The first one up is going to be Al.
All right. Well, the IDEA is a federal law that is going to require Congress to act to fully fund the IDEA. And so I would work with California's congressional delegation to keep fighting. I know we've been fighting for decades, but we need to keep fighting for the federal government to pay, their fair share of special education costs. But beyond that, I'm not going to wait for the federal government because we've been waiting for decades. I have a bill that's in the legislature now that's trying to increase funding for special education students because we know that even though we're seeing declining enrollment throughout the state, that we're seeing increasing numbers of special education students that are putting, a big challenge for our local school budgets. And so I'm going to be fighting both at the federal level as well as at the state level to increase funding for special education.
Thank you. Next is Anthony.
Well, Ella's right. We can't wait for the federal government. We didn't. We didn't wait for the federal government on so many different aspects of governance. In this state, we did not wait for the federal government to do anything on gun control because we knew they wouldn't. So we passed the 5 toughest gun control bills in the history of the United States. We couldn't wait for the federal government to do something about tobacco abuse. So we passed the 5 toughest anti-tobacco bills in the United States. We need to do that with IDEA funding. The best way to make sure we have our own funding in this state is, again, to re-examine Proposition 13. Our schools, our municipalities have been cash starved since the passage of Proposition 13. It's something that, with a little flirtation we had with the split roll, we haven't really looked at it, but it's something we need to do. And we need to California needs to take care of California. We should not be waiting any longer for the federal government. They've proven to be inept.
Thank you. Frank, you're next.
Thank you so much for the question. I agree that we shouldn't wait for the federal government. I mean, they've dismantled the California Department of Education, which is largely where, these services should have been coming from. So prioritize California to fully fund special education. Part of my program does call for sped justice. And I think the main thing we need to really highlight is the instability in special education from the professionals. A 50% turnover is much, much higher actually in special education. And unlike any other profession, where in a doctor, in the medical field, you would have a surgeon dealing with the highest, most complicated cases that takes years of training. And what's happening out of desperation across districts is that we're putting in the newest people, the youngest people, and expecting them to offer actual professional services for some of the highest needs. I think we need to invest in college track to make sure that free education is available for those who are going to special education. They receive the training and mentorship necessary to provide the stability of the services.
Thank you, Frank. Gus, you're next.
Thank you for the question. So Congress responds to only 2 things. One is money and the other is public pressure. Money comes from special interests, so it's got to be public pressure. There are so many amazing organizations that do work in this space, community-based organizations. My own campaign manager is actually a special education advocate. But I was just in San Luis Obispo about a week ago, and they were having to walk for autism, and there were a whole bunch of community organizations who were there who work in the space of special needs. And I think what we got to do is put together a very loud, very visible public pressure campaign on Congress, utilizing the stories and the efforts of all the community partners that are out there who work in this space, who do really amazing hard work in that space. And that, by the way, organizing that kind of aggressive public pressure campaign on Congress is exactly the kind of thing that the superintendent can use the visibility of the role to do, and will be able to do regardless of whether the governor's proposal passes or not. So that's something I very much look forward to engaging on as superintendent. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh.
Well, let me agree, kind of vigorously with Frank. One of the best and smartest thing we can do is address the educated workforce problem around special ed, and that's going to take dedicated funds. But it's more than worth the investment if we're serious about raising the standard of special education in California. And so I would wholeheartedly support that. And I think the superintendent has to be a really aggressive advocate, especially within the budget frame, in finding the funds to do that. Otherwise, we're not going to see any progress, especially short of the federal investment, and really unlikely that we're going to see that during this administration. But it's also true that this really isn't a red or blue issue. And our delegation and others and other superintendents and secretaries of education across the country should provide for a coalition that elevates this issue because it is important, and the federal government has not met its obligation for 40 years. And everybody knows a family with a special needs child, and they deserve every bit of support.
Thank you. Nichelle, you're next.
The coalitions that I believe need to be built to demand fully funding of special education is, as a superintendent, is working with stakeholders, our special education workforce, our general education teachers, administrators, folks that are boots on the ground, that understand what the need is and how we can utilize current funding to begin to meet those needs, and how we can fight together as collective advocates for special education, and not treat education as just a line item in a budget where we're looking at what the specific needs are. There are a variety of disabilities, seen and unseen, variety of needs and supports that are required, and understanding what those look like so that we can allocate the specific funding for those, which leads to fully funding special education.
Thank you. And Richard, you're next.
So the percentage of students with IEPs in California has gone over the past decade from about 11, 12% up to about 18% now. So it is an issue that impacts all schools and all students as much as any other issue. And we do have opportunities at our local and state level to increase investment in behavioral health support, to increase investment in paraeducators, reduce ratios for special education teachers. We just achieved that through a negotiated agreement with our teachers. And so there are examples that we can lift up. In terms of the federal government's responsibility, the federal government is now going to spend 4 times the amount it spends on special education on private school voucher giveaways. So one coalition we need to build is everybody who's running for Congress right now, especially in our swing districts, needs to be held accountable to how they're going to make sure that the federal government meets its obligations.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for those answers on special education, a really important topic. We're gonna ask the audience in the room if they have any questions for the candidates. Candidates, my ask of you is simply raise your hand if you want to answer the question. You don't have to answer the question. It's a choice. But we'll give 30 seconds for your response if you should have one. Anybody in the room want to place their question in the chat or come off mute and ask your question? Now would be a good time. Okay, so while we're warming that up, we have a registration question that was asked. This is, what extra education funding do you think children speaking another language or coming from another country should receive? Anybody want to answer that?
I can take a crack at that. Yeah.
All right, awesome, great.
So right now the local control funding formula does provide additional funding for English learners. But as a child of immigrants, as someone that grew up in a household speaking a language other than English, I fully support the English Learner Roadmap program to support immigrant families to celebrate multilingual diversity. We've come a long ways from English only, where we now celebrate multilingual education. And so I'm a big supporter of like dual immersion programs and other programs to support English learners.
Great, thank you. Nichelle?
Yeah, I will say that I don't necessarily believe that we need to continue to put good money after bad money. We need to look at how we're spending the money and look at the outcomes. Our second or non-English language learners getting the most out of what we're providing because they're not overall performing well in a lot of different areas academically. And it has nothing to do with their ability. It's a barrier to the supports that they're being provided. So we should be thinking about what that support looks like.
Great. Anyone else next? Richard, you have your hand raised?
Yeah, thanks, Vanessa. Yeah, I agree with the point that Al made about expanding dual immersion. We should treat if a student's coming into our school system beginning fluency in a language other than English and then can master English, that's a tremendous advantage. And really, all of our students should be multilingual. So the investment needs to go in incentivizing and preparing teachers who can teach in dual immersion programs.
Okay. Great. Anyone else want to answer that question that was asked? Josh?
Yeah, I just figured out how to use the raised hand function again. So let me agree with my colleagues. Dual language facility is a gift that we give young people in either direction in a multicultural, multilingual state and economy and culture of California. And all of the data shows that it yields great benefits. And moreover, we are misdiagnosing many non-English speakers as special needs kids when in fact they will thrive in a dual language environment.
Okay. Great. So we're going to move on. We have some community questions here in the chat, so we're going to take those. Here's the question. Many of you cite lower class size as policy. Research suggests that the numbers cited 18 in elementary, 25 in secondary, the effect is virtually zero. How will you fund or encourage local districts to get class sizes below 17? And we'll start with Frank.
Thank you. I mean, again, with funding, you could do a lot of things. You could lower it below that. I think part of the concern I have, this idea that lowering class size doesn't achieve anything, is that show me a district in California over 10 years that has maintained that lower class size, and you can't find any. So I think it gets presented that within the framework of a district, when you're costing millions of dollars to hire more staff compared to other strategies, do you get a comparison? Maybe, right? But let's transform education by lowering classrooms. Absolutely.
Okay, great. Richard?
Yeah, well, I actually appreciate that question because we've got a lot of research, for instance, in the early grades, TK through third grade, that 15-1 is the standard that we should be trying to achieve. And to Frank's point, until we get to that, the idea that lowering class size doesn't make a difference, it does make a difference, but when we actually get it to the right ratio, this is why we need to be aggressive about revenue strategies in California, get the wealth of the fourth largest economy back into our schools so we can do what we know works.
Thank you, Richard. Gus?
Yeah, thank you for this question. So I modeled out my proposal for how to lower the class sizes in my book. It's actually on my website. It's about $20 billion all in, which at 80,000 a teacher would be 250,000 teachers, which would allow us to basically cut the class sizes in half, which should get it down to actually about 13-14, which would put us underneath that 15-1 ratio. So it's absolutely doable. And again, it just takes the legislature doing it. I'm happy to work with the legislature to make it happen, but they do have a supermajority, so they do have the power to implement that proposal. Thank you.
Great. Here's the next question in the chat from CADC. How do you support equity and excellence, giving equity is a way for getting all students to have strong outcomes? Anybody want to take this one? We'll get to Richard.
So when I started on the school board, about 25% of our Black and Latino students were graduating eligible to apply to the Cal State and UC system. And so we said, no, we're going to give access to all of our students and support so that they can succeed in passing those A to G classes. And we've tripled the rate. You know, we got up to almost 70% pre-pandemic. When you believe in your students and provide the support, students will measure up.
Okay. Thank you. Al, you're next.
Yeah, as I stated earlier, I want to continue to champion, successful data-driven programs like community schools, providing wraparound services to the students with the greatest needs, expanded learning opportunities program to provide more after-school and summer school programs, universal school meals. I was proud to support that. A kid can't learn if he's hungry. So we need to continue to make sure that we're meeting all the needs of our kids so that they can learn and thrive.
Thank you. And Gus?
Thank you for the question. So first of all, getting to equity and excellence involves like what are we actually teaching the kids? So right now in the system overall, only about half of kids meet reading standards and only about 1 in 3 meet math standards. But that's because of some things that are just basic choices. Like for instance, we watched Mississippi crushing us in the national rankings because they've committed 100% to science and reading, and we still have not been able to do that as a state. That's a simple choice that we could make to get on board with that. We could look at Singapore maths curriculum, which is the world's #1 math curriculum, and adapt it to California standards. That's something I'm going to work on.
Thank you, Gus. And Nichelle.
Equity in education and supporting student outcomes is not about addressing test scores. Equity is ensuring that not one cookie cutter approach to how we teach children. Equity is giving each student what they need and the way that they need it to ensure that they have positive outcomes. Not saying this one program is the one that every student needs to have applied to their skill set and it works. It's giving each student what they need to be successful the way that they need it.
Thank you. Here's the next question from Bernice. What would your strategies be to bring families back to public education from the charter system? What changes would you want to see legislatively to limit funding and/or scope of charter schools? And we'll take Frank.
Thank you for the question. And I think there's been progress. We've seen that when you don't have the same rules for all organizations receiving public funds, then you won't have the same outcomes. We had a situation where charter schools were mismanaging hundreds of millions of dollars. That would not happen at a school district. And when the legislator was actually trying to hold these charter schools accountable, it was watered down, despite, again, making sure that you have 2/3 the majority. So I think the first and foremost, as state superintendent, we need to be clear the rules are the same for everybody. Make sure that we want quality public education with public dollars. It should be available for everyone.
Thank you. Gus?
Yes, first let me start by saying no one in my neighborhood would ever have sent their kid to Roosevelt High School if they'd had any other option. I think charter schools are just a tool in the toolbox. They're an important tool in the toolbox. They're not a magic bullet, but they're an option that I think families should have. The way that you bring people back to traditional public schools is to elevate the performance of traditional public schools. The high-performing public school systems don't have enrollment problems. Everybody's happy to move to those places. There's tremendous unmet demand for high-quality public schools. If we elevate the performance of them, then people will move there, and that'll solve a lot of the problems that we've been talking about tonight.
Thank you. Al?
Yeah, so I actually led the fight. My bill, Assembly Bill 84 last year, was the top priority for the California Federation of Teachers, California School Employees Association. We were working together to strengthen charter school oversight and accountability. so that we can crack down on the documented cases of fraud and corruption that Frank was talking about earlier. Unfortunately, there are too many people that are willing to let this fraud and corruption go on. But I'm going to keep fighting with my bill.
Okay, thank you, Josh.
Let me just add. So, in addition to all of the sound guidance about greater transparency, better accountability, this is a huge system. And to Gus's point, there are examples of real excellence, innovation across the public school system. And what is needed, among other things, at CDE is the facility and the guidance to find those examples and figure out how to replicate them statewide. And that has been missing over the last several years. But all the evidence shows that if you can improve the offering at a local school, they will compete.
Okay, great. Thank you. Here's the next question from Joe. Would you favor an expansion of the school food distribution and meals program to ensure that more students can have healthy meals at school every day? Anybody want to answer that? We'll start with Gus.
Thank you. There's actually some really good work going on in the legislature right now. This is one thing I've been very supportive of, which is more work to make sure that our kids are actually getting healthful foods in the meals that are served. The school system is actually the single biggest provider of meals. Is far bigger than any restaurant chain in America, and so it is a tremendous opportunity to have an impact on children's health. And so the work that's being done in the legislature right now, I'm broadly supportive of it, and I'd be happy as superintendent to lend my voice to that effort. Thank you.
Thank you. Richard?
Yeah, well, I think when we think about expanding school meals, I mean, we've had innovations with breakfast in the classroom, providing school meals during after school programs. We know that when our students go home on the weekend, they often are lacking proper nutrition. And during COVID, we were able to provide our students with take-home meals. We should be able to do that. And frankly, especially our classified staff, our food service workers, should be able to afford our school meals as well.
Thank you. Al, you're next.
Yeah, so as a public school parent, my daughter's in high school now. I mean, I know that we need to do a better job of providing more healthy alternatives in our school meals. I mean, it was great that we were able to achieve universal school meals for all, but we need to make sure that we're serving healthy meals. And so, to that effort, there is money in the budget this year that's being proposed to give funding to school kitchens, cafeteria kitchens, so that they can more schools can provide food made from scratch.
Great, thank you. Next, Nichelle.
I do believe that that we should expand the program so that more students have access. We assume that because students look like they can afford the meal that they can. Parents can't always afford to pay the additional. Free lunch should be for everyone. But I also understand, having been a teacher and seen the meals, healthy doesn't necessarily equate to tasty, visually appealing, or filling for a lot of students. And so we have to think about that also.
Thank you. And Josh.
I'll be quick. Let me just agree with Al. I think we should be very proud of the work that the legislature's done. And extending universal school meals, both increase access, but reduce the stigma for students who come from families that are challenged. But to Hal's point, we need to invest in facilities at every school so we can prepare those healthy, tasty meals at every school. And if we can do that, that's progress.
Okay, wonderful. So to give everybody in the audience equal opportunity in terms of asking a question, I've decided to only have one question being asked of each audience member, just in the sake of time. So we have this next question, which would be the last audience member question, which is from the Chinese American Democratic Club. This is a question. Given the unique attraction of California and the Bay Area, our high school students, are not just competing among each other in the 21st century workforce, but the talent from all over the world. How do we retain families from going into private schools and cultivate our students to be productive in this ever-changing, high-tech work environment? Would anybody like to answer that question? Okay, great. Thank you. Thanks for raising all your hands at once. I'm going to start from my left. Let's go with Richard first.
If the experience of a high school student is that while they're in high school, they're doing paid internships, they are taking college classes, they are engaged in activities like sports or music or arts or clubs that actually make them want to go to school in the morning, we can provide the highest quality education in our public school system that's possible, and families will be attracted to that. That should be the common experience of a high school student.
Thank you. Thanks, Richard. Gus, you're next.
So right now, the unemployment rate for kids 0 to 5 years out of college is over twice what the national unemployment rate is. Kids are getting killed out there because of AI and because of a global workforce, because they are competing against students from other countries where, frankly, the basic skills that those countries are teaching are better than we're doing here in America. We've got to elevate the performance of our traditional public schools. That, again, will cause people to move into them. That will solve a lot of the enrollment problems that we face. And it will leave them with the skills they need to have AI amplify them and be competitive in the job market that is rapidly evolving. If we do those, we will be able to give our kids the tools that they need to succeed. Thank you.
Okay, great. Frank?
I want to emphasize just how far behind I think we are as a generation, as a country, and how little supports actually are available. If we want to take this question seriously about what we're going to prepare people for, an economy that doesn't even exist, an economy that AI, that this national government, the state government, the fourth largest economy in the world is investing in AI and tech, which is basically saying there will be no jobs for you, right? You have to radically rethink this. And so it expresses the urgency to really fund education because we are so far behind.
Thanks, Frank. Al?
I've always been a big champion of career technical education, what people used to call vocational education. And we're not talking just about like auto shop or wood shop, but we're talking about teaching real world job skills, as part of our college and career pathways. And so, we know that students engage more when they're studying things that meet the A through G requirements to get into our UCs and CSUs, but that at the same time align for the real world job skills that are in demand for the job market of today and the future.
Thank you. Nichelle?
I think, in short, it's following the state chancellor's recommendation of preparing students, K-12 students, for college and for the workforce through dual enrollment opportunities that also include workforce preparation, getting them acclimated to jobs of the future, blue jobs, green jobs, using AI. I agree with Frank. We are so far behind the eight ball right now, worrying about how we utilize AI for all of the wrong reasons and focusing on workforce preparation and academic preparation for our students.
Thank you, Nichelle. And Josh?
I'll be quick. So to the first part of the question, how do we keep families in the public school system? Like I said, promote excellence and rigor in schools. We have some wonderful schools, including Lowell in San Francisco and Troy in my area. On the second side, Nichelle and Al are right. Let us do CTE. Let's do it right, and make sure that those pathways not only lead into post-secondary education, but they're properly aligned with industry guidance and the local economy. And if we can do that, we'll make some progress.
Okay, wonderful. Well, that's great. So I recognize that I called on the CADC twice. One of them was an acronym, so my apologies for that. But in the spirit of time, we are going to move on to the closing segment. and we'll kind of discuss further how we can respond to the amount of questions we received. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and hand it off to my colleague to close us out. Michelle?
Yes, thank you all for participating tonight. Now we'd like to give each of the candidates 30 seconds for their closing statements. Please speak about any topic related to the spy role and your vision for it. And we'll start with Anthony Rendon. Is Anthony still with us? Okay, maybe he had another engagement. Sorry, we missed him. We'll go on to Frank Lara.
Thank you again for the time. I don't know if that thing's going to reset or not. But I did want to just say how excited I am to constantly be in the panel with such great leaders who are all on the same page broadly as to how we transform education. That means that our voices should not go unheard at a state legislature, at a state assembly, where they've had one organization has had supermajority for such a long time. If we're going to transform education, we gotta be bold. That is my career. That's how I built my reputation as the only socialist, as a third party candidate with a Peace and Freedom Party. And I have a career to back that up.
Thank you. Next is Gus Matamal.
Yes, thank you for the great discussion tonight. For every kid who's born into a low-income life, as I was, public school system is very likely the one and only realistic shot they will ever have at a pathway into the middle class. And so, if we allow our public school system to keep going year after year after year, performing at the level that it does, remember, half of kids, barely half, meet reading standards, only a third meet math standards. We are robbing those kids of the one and only shot they had at a pathway into the middle class. So as superintendent, I'm going to be focused on elevating the performance of our public schools, and I will be a champion for the kids. Thank you.
Thank you. And next is Josh Newman.
So thanks again. And to Frank's point, appreciate everybody's comments tonight. So, I'd say it's important to remember that public education is a public good. It's a precious resource. And to Gus's point, historically, it's been the most powerful engine of opportunity in American life. And the quality of our public education system will determine whether California has a skilled workforce, or whether we can finally confront inequality and affordability in California, and whether the next generation is fully prepared to participate fully in civic life. And that's what this election should be about.
Thank you. Next is Michelle Henderson.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting us all to this forum. The superintendent of public instruction oversees TK through 12 education, not preschool, not adult ed, not community college. The superintendent is a statewide constitutional officer. That person should have some background, some lived experience, some deep understanding of California's classrooms, not what they think should be, not what they heard should be, but what it is. And it's time that we start looking towards a superintendent of public instruction that has coalition building experience. I am that candidate. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Richard Barrera.
Yeah, thank you again for giving us this opportunity. I'm a first generation American. My dad came here from Colombia. My mom's parents came here from Europe through Ellis Island. The public education system has meant everything to me and my family. My sons are graduates of the public school system. We should have the greatest public school system in the world in California. Our parents and grandparents' generation actually built that. We need to get back to investing in our public schools. That's what created the fourth wealthiest economy in the world. I'm proud to be endorsed by the 300,000 teachers from the California Teachers Association. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And our last will be Al Moritzucci.
Thank you. Thank you for the forum. I'm the only candidate in this race that has the combined experience of statewide education leadership, local school district governance, and classroom teaching experience. That's why I'm endorsed by educators from the California Federation of Teachers to the California School Employees Association to the Association of California School Administrators. I'm also proud to be endorsed by Equality California, the California Labor Federation, and just today I was endorsed by the Bay Area Reporter. So hope to earn your vote. Thank you.
Thank you all. Vanessa, do you want to close it
Yeah,
out?
sure. So, on behalf of Parents of Public Schools of San Francisco, that represents over 60,000 stakeholders, and the League of Women's Voters of San Francisco, who is also a statewide organization, we just want to thank you all for attending and wish you the best in your endeavors. And we want to thank the community for being on the line tonight and sharing your questions and just thinking forward with us. We have shared the deadline to vote there in the chat for anyone, just in case. And we know those ballots are out already. And everybody have a great evening. And thank you so much again. Take care.
Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everybody.
everyone. Have a
Thank
great
you.
night.
Thank you.
Alrighty. So thank you everybody for being here. I'm gonna go ahead and remove our friends. Thank you so much.